We seem to be living in an era where you can buy some really surprisingly good musical instruments at very affordable prices, like this Marcus Miller V7 5-string bass, for example. Manufacturers seem to have really discovered the ability to give musicians what they want in a musical instrument while keeping their costs down so the prices remain low. This bass you can pick up brand new in the UK for around £500. And that got me to thinking, if you can pick up instruments this cheap, brand new, is there really any value in buying a second-hand or a used musical instrument anymore? So I set myself a little challenge. Could I find a bass on the used market for less than £500 that I would prefer to play over this Sire Marcus Miller bass? And here is what I found. This is an MTD Kingston Z5. Now, for those of you who don't know, MTD stands for Michael Tobias Design, and Michael Tobias is an American custom bass builder who makes very expensive basses for some really good bass players. But he also has this affordable line of basses that are made in China according to his designs called MTD Kingston, and that's what this is. Now this has some obvious similarities to the Sire Marcus Miller in that it's a 5-string bass with 2 pickups and an active preamp. But it also has some very obvious differences, so we're not really comparing like with like. Now, the Sire bass is a Fender Jazz style bass with an active preamp. It's got single coil pickups. Now, I haven't been able to find a lot of information about the pickups on this bass, but they seem to be humbuckers. We don't have any coil splitting capabilities or anything on this. We also don't have the ability to switch the preamp on and off, which you do on the Sire bass. So the Sire has the ability to be both a kind of passive bass and an active bass, whereas this is kind of solely an active bass. But I'm not really comparing the two basses in terms of which is better. It's just simply a question of, can I find something for less than £500 that I personally would prefer to play? Is there any benefit for me in going into the second-hand market? So let me have a bit of a play on both of these basses and we'll see which one I prefer. So I won't spend ages talking about the Sire bass because I've demoed it on this channel before, but just to give you a quick rundown of why it's such a good bass for the money, apart from the obvious, which is just that it sounds good and it's really easy to play. But you've got a load of features that you wouldn't normally find on cheaper basses, not historically anyway. Things like ebony fretboard, bone nut. The preamp is really outstanding. You can switch it on and off, so it's incredibly versatile. I mean, versatility is really huge here. So I've actually got the preamp switched off at the moment. So let's have a quick listen to just briefly listen to the pickups. So this is the neck pickup here. Then the bridge pickup. And then both pickups together. So that's just passive. And then when you switch the preamp on, you've got all of these different things you can do. So you've got like a bass control. You can either boost or cut. And then you've got this parametric mid-range. You can set the frequency that you want to either boost or cut. You see what I mean? So you've got loads of tonal shaping options you can do there with the preamp, and you've got a treble control as well, and you've got a passive tone control that you can use when the preamp is switched off. You've got Fender style single coil pickups, like J style pickups. So essentially it's an active jazz bass. The fretwork is excellent. So there's really a lot of versatility here, a lot of tonal options that you can get out of this bass, and it's really very difficult to pick any holes in it. It's really difficult to find any reasons to not like it. One thing that I don't particularly like about the bass is that the string spacing is slightly narrower than on the 4-string model. Now that is typical of Fender Jazz style 5-string basses, so it's quite normal for these style of basses to have that. So that's really a personal taste thing. That's just my thing. I prefer to have a wider string spacing, more similar to a 4-string. So let's compare that to the MTD. So the MTD doesn't have an active passive switch, meaning that the preamp is switched on all the time. Now I do prefer to have the ability to switch the preamp on and off like you have on the Sire. But in this case, I guess if I just notch everything, so everything's in the middle, so nothing's boosted or cut, then that's kind of giving you an idea of what the kind of raw sound of the pickups sound like. So the front pickup sounds like this. And the back pickup sounds like this. And then both pickups together. And yeah, what else can we do? Let's try this preamp out then. So let's just give it a little bit of a bass boost. Again, this is a very powerful preamp, very much like the Sire. So if you really dime any of the controls, you tend to clip and, you know, it doesn't sound good. So we'll just kind of give it a little bit of a boost. So I can already see on this it's close to clipping, even though I've just pushed that a little bit. But it is a nice sounding preamp. Both the preamps sound really nice, to be fair. The Sire preamp definitely gives you more in terms of options. You have a bass, a middle, and a treble control on the Z5, but it doesn't give you that parametric thing that the Sire has with the mid control. So the mid control on the Z5 sounds like this. And then there's also a treble control as well. So maybe if I dip the mids and just slightly boost the bass and the treble, that'll give you that kind of scooped sound. Yeah, so it's a nice preamp. Both preamps are really good, to be fair. I can't fault either of them. So one thing that I think really makes a difference on this bass that I really like is 24 frets, and the frets on here are really nice actually. So I worked out that this bass was about 7 years old when I bought it, and considering it's 7 years old, the frets are in incredible condition. They're really, really good, and the fret work is excellent. It has 24 frets, which I think for me is a big advantage. Now, a lot of bass players think, why do you need 24 frets on a bass? And I can understand that because we're bass players, right? We're supposed to be playing in the low end. But I do like to play the melodic stuff. I also like to play chords. And I can do all of that kind of stuff. Jazz soloing as well, I can do on this bass. Now, I know a lot of people hate that on bass. I love it. So for me, that really works for me on this bass. So from point of view of string spacing, 24 frets. The 0 fret is not such a big deal, but I do like it. I think it's a nice little addition. I think this bass is slightly more my kind of bass, to be honest with you, than the Sire. Now, would I be able to say that just because this is my kind of bass, that means it's a better bass? No, I wouldn't be able to say that. I couldn't say that this was necessarily a better bass than the Sire, but I do prefer it personally. So from that point of view, I guess the conclusion that I can come to based on this experiment is that I did manage to find a bass for less than £500 second hand that I prefer playing to the Sire. But I think at the same time I still have to conclude that we live in an era of such good basses for such reasonable prices that I think the value really is in new bases now. I think you're better off buying a cheaper new base than you are spending the equivalent amount of money on a used base. Now, I have to say that I did have to look for quite a long time to find this base. It took me quite a while to find a base that I liked more than the Sire on the used market, and I don't think you can just go out and buy one of these for less than £500. Certainly not in the UK. The Sire bases are much more common and much more readily available. It is quite difficult to find these things, and when you do find them, sometimes people put them up for much more expensive prices. So I think I was quite lucky to get this for the price that I got it at. And so, yeah, it is possible to find value on the second-hand base market, but I don't think it's easy. I think that more often than not, you're probably better off buying a new base nowadays.